Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for hopping on. We'll probably give it another minute, but this meeting is being recorded. We want to just make sure that we are able to give information from this presentation to the public. So that is why you've just heard that the meeting is being recorded, but we'll give it another minute or two for folks to hop on. Thanks so much. Okay, well, we have a busy agenda, want to save as much time for public comment as possible. So I'll kick things off. First and foremost, thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone taking time to come and talk about carbon management. I know you have a lot of other things that you could be doing on a Thursday evening, so really appreciate it. In case we haven't met before, my name is Quinn Antis. I'm with the Colorado Energy Office, and I am focused on all things carbon management, which we define as industrial point source carbon capture, atmospheric carbon removal, CO2 utilization, and geologic carbon storage. Tonight, we're going to be talking about, before we get into the public comment, I'm just going to do a really quick overview of Colorado's approach towards carbon management and a little bit of some key findings from the carbon management roadmap, which we have been putting together. HB 23-1210 directed the Energy Office to really examine a lot of different components of carbon management and how it could support the state strategy and decarbonization. So I'll go over some of that, and then we will have time for public comment. We had a lot of folks register to provide comments, so would love if folks could keep their remarks to under 3 minutes. But with that, I will share my screen. Hold on, it's moving slowly today. Okay, can folks see that? Great, excellent. Well, great. So before we get into public comment, we'll do a quick carbon management overview and some key findings from the carbon management roadmap. To kick us off, you've probably seen this graph before. Colorado statutorily is beholden to reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 relative to a 2005 baseline. The red stars in this graph represent the statutory emissions reductions targets we have in order to reach net zero by 2050. The blue line is business as usual. What would happen if we just did nothing? And the green line is the most recent estimate of how we're doing, where our current actions will take us with regard to our 2050 target. We're going to get pretty close with all the actions we're doing right now to 2025, 2030, more actions coming. But as we start looking out towards 2050, we can see that there's a more sizable delta, currently estimating about 50 million metric tons. So I want to bring this up for a few reasons, which first and foremost, the primary way that the state is working to reduce emissions is through transitioning to renewable energy and electrifying transportation, buildings, and industry. These strategies are going to be the workhorse of how we decarbonize our state. But the delta that we're looking at for 2050 is pretty significant. And so we believe carbon management will play a role in helping us meet our goals, both with carbon capture for hard to decarbonize industrial processes like cement and steel, and for carbon removal, including direct air capture and nature-based solutions such as soil sequestration to reduce cumulative emissions or emissions that have already been put into our atmosphere and will stay there for a couple hundred years. So to take a step back, what is carbon management? There is a metaphor that is pretty often used when we talk about carbon management that I think is a really helpful way of kind of understanding how it fits into the broader climate conversation. So if you picture a bathtub, and this slide has an image of a bathtub on it, the water is almost overflowing and the faucet is on. Right now, that bathtub that's almost overflowing is really a metaphor for our GHG emissions, and the faucet is still on. We are still emitting. The number one most important thing we can do is to turn the faucet off to stop emitting. That is the number one goal. However, draining the bathtub is another important tool that we should be exploring because there's a lot of climate benefit to that. So I mentioned this earlier, but carbon management, as HB 23-1210 defines, is inclusive of point source carbon capture, carbon dioxide removal or CDR, carbon utilization, and carbon storage. Point source carbon capture, instead of polluting CO2 from industrial processes, carbon capture intercepts that CO2 at the source to recycle it or permanently store it. This is really important for industrial processes that we don't yet know how to decarbonize. For example, the number 2 most widely used substance on Earth after water is cement. And we do not know how to make cement without generating CO2. And so for these processes that are really important to our economy, there's a lot of value in us decarbonizing those now with whatever tool we have available to us, so that we can start meaningfully addressing our emissions without waiting another, genuinely maybe several decades before we actually know how to decarbonize these processes. A main benefit from this is that carbon capture technologies also reduce co-pollutants, including SOx, NOx, and particulate matter, including PM 2.5. Most carbon capture technologies actually do not work unless you capture these other co-pollutants. Carbon dioxide removal is where we remove CO2 directly from the atmosphere through nature-based and engineered processes. This includes reforestation, planting trees, soil management, putting CO2 and carbon into our soils, biomass carbon removal. Biomass is really any natural product that we're really not eating or using for anything else. So think of a corn husk, or in wildfire mitigation, when we chop down trees, that leftover log is a good example of biomass. And you can take that biomass and create biochar, which is kind of like activated charcoal, a bio oil, which you pyrolyze biomass, heat at really high temperatures, and create a carbon-rich bio oil that you inject underground and it stays there. Biomass burial. So if you think about how wildfire mitigation has historically been done, oftentimes when you slash those trees, people will just burn them, and that CO2 goes immediately right back into the atmosphere. So biomass burial is just burying that biomass so the CO2 doesn't go back to the atmosphere. And BECCS, which is bioenergy for carbon capture, with carbon capture and storage, so creating sustainable fuels with biomass. Mineralization is really a natural process that people have learned how to expedite and mimic on a faster timeline. So it's where CO2 reacts with minerals to form a stable carbonate. And marine CDR, obviously not one we're really looking at in Colorado, but if you've heard people talk about enhanced ocean alkalinity, that's a good example, putting CO2 back into the ocean, which really is a CO2 sink, and direct air capture, which is capturing CO2 from the atmosphere by genuinely big fans. So all of these are being explored in the roadmap as subsectors of carbon dioxide removal. One thing I also want to highlight, so this chart is taken from data from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. They have said that globally we will not meet our carbon targets without a lot of carbon removal. And so this, the Breakthrough Institute modeled the IPCC's data and found that with the amount of carbon removal that the IPCC projects we need, that green sliver in the middle, which is pretty small, is really the total potential of natural climate solutions. And so engineered or artificial carbon removal, things more in line with direct air capture, or the engineered solutions in biomass carbon removal are going to be, or mineralization are going to be really, really critical components of how we reach the level of scale for carbon removal. Carbon utilization is recycling CO2 to make green building materials, fuels, cement, commodity chemicals, bubbly drinks, etc. Utilizing CO2 might not be durable. For example, if you have carbonated beverage, as soon as you pop that top, that CO2 goes right back into the atmosphere. But it allows for second use of the captured CO2 before it goes to the atmosphere. And it can be significantly better than the counterfactual. For example, turning CO2 into fuels is much better than just using more fossil fuels. So carbon storage, CO2 can be sequestered in geologic formations as well as biomass, soils, minerals, and more. CO2 storage is often classified in terms of durability. So for example, as soon as you stop doing practices to put CO2 into soils, that CO2 goes right back into the atmosphere. And so we're really looking at and prioritizing CO2 storage that is very durable. That is the reason that geologic storage is really critical, because the CO2 can be stored for 10,000 to 100,000 years. This is a very safe and well-established process. This image on the right is from California and shows how deeply we are looking at sequestering CO2, about 2 miles underground, and you inject CO2 into porous rock that is trapped underneath a cap rock that keeps that CO2 underground. If you have more questions on that, the ECMC has released a CCS safety study that I think is really wonderful. And then within this too, just wanted to highlight that the estimated CO2 geologic storage potential in Colorado injecting CO2 subsurface is really significant. Medium estimate is about 134 billion metric tons of CO2. So Colorado in particular has a tremendous amount of geologic storage resource. All right, getting into some of the fun data, Lawrence Livermore National Lab did an incredible research initiative called the Roads to Removal Report, and they modeled out on a county by county level how much total CDR potential, carbon dioxide removal potential there is across main well-established technological pathways to understand how much CDR potential is within each part of the country. Lawrence Livermore National Lab was very kind, and they subsetted Colorado's data. And so this is from them. They estimate that Colorado has a total cumulative potential for Colorado to sequester or remove, 1.6 million tons of CO2 with reforestation. The challenge with this is it's a really high risk of reversal since Colorado is very prone to wildfires. What we were talking about earlier, if those trees get burned, that CO2 goes right back into the atmosphere. So that's a real risk with reforestation. And so with that, there's also fairly limited durability. You keep that CO2 as long as the tree is alive. Soil management, the total potential from Lawrence Livermore National Lab is 8 million tons in Colorado, total cumulative potential. Again, high risk of reversal. As soon as you stop implementing those good soil carbon practices, that CO2 goes back into the atmosphere. For that, there's also limited durability. They also assessed biomass carbon removal, which within their report, they only looked at turning biomass into fuels. And then marine CDR, which we don't qualify for, and then direct air capture. So on their biomass carbon removal, they found that Colorado has 32.6 million tons per year potential to generate sustainable fuels from Colorado's biomass. And that was modeled as utilization to create hydrogen and sustainable aviation fuels. Direct air capture was absolutely the biggest potential they found in Colorado, with a whopping 640 million tons per year potential. It's hard for us to abstract that out to a total cumulative potential, a lot of factors within that. So they just modeled out 640 million tons per year, which is wild, especially because that's a pretty negligible risk of reversal. That's assuming geologic storage, so it's very durable. And quickly wanted to just highlight some projects that are currently being built operational in Colorado. There's an ethanol CCS plant in northern Colorado. The Front Range Energy ethanol plant is also looking at this. Yuma ethanol CCS plant, Charm Industrial, which does biomass to bio-oil that gets injected underground, creating carbon negative bricks in Lakewood. Cement plant in Pueblo is exploring carbon capture. The Colorado School of Mines was awarded with a carbon safe federal funding to explore a lot of detail around sequestering CO2 in Pueblo. And the Southern Ute Tribe is exploring a gas-fired carbon capture plant. Okay, getting into the roadmap. The intention was to identify the carbon management, climate, and economic opportunities available in Colorado that best draw on our state's natural resources, industry, talent, labor force, and economic development capabilities. Our primary areas of focus were really exactly what I spoke about reforestation, improved forest management, inorganic and organic soil carbon sequestration, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, biomass with carbon removal and storage, direct air capture and storage, enhanced weathering, which is enhanced rock weathering. It's square, enhanced rock weathering and carbon mineralization are square and rectangle, two versions of the same thing. Geologic carbon sequestration, carbon utilization, and industrial carbon capture processes. Some assessments that we were tasked with exploring include accounting and verification measures and protocols, economic opportunities and market risks, environmental justice standards, fair labor practices and other workforce measures, project siting criteria, and prioritize potential projects for Colorado, the necessary infrastructure, including best reservoirs for CO2 storage, existing CO2 pipelines, and how those pipelines can best be connected with pipelines needed for industrial carbon management, infrastructure that allows access to clean energy resources for carbon management projects, a lot of stuff. Within this too, we've also tried to make a stakeholder process that is as fair and open as possible. And also this roadmap, we really want it to be reflective of what the industry really needs, what people really want to see. And so we started out with virtual expert roundtables. I'll go into those in just a second. Then we had community meetings in partnership with the Energy and Carbon Management Commission's Class 6 rules. We did then put together a draft for agency and expert review. Then we're hosting this session today. Thanks so much for coming. And we'll publish a final version of the roadmap to be released in Q1 of 2025 after integrating public comment from this session and over the next month or so. The virtual expert roundtables, we held one focused on carbon dioxide transport and storage, direct air capture, labor and workforce development, community and environmental advocate perspectives on health, safety, and community benefits planning, industry perspectives on health, safety, and community benefits planning, carbon markets and finance, natural and working lands, and carbon dioxide removal. Over 150 stakeholders were invited and over 70 ultimately participated in these roundtables. The targeted participants represented a wide range of interests and sectors, including local community leaders, tribal representatives, local governments, environmental advocacy groups, business and industry, buyers in the carbon market, educational institutions, carbon management project developers, labor representatives, state agency representatives. And from that, we also hosted community meetings to gather broad public input on the carbon management roadmap and to really just help inform the roadmap. So to reduce the number of asks on our community members, these meetings were held in partnership with the Energy and Carbon Management Commission as they presented their draft Class 6 rules. In case you're not familiar with that term, Class 6 is the categorization for injecting CO2 underground. These meetings were held in Durango, Pueblo, and Firestone with a virtual public meeting held to include community members across the state. I see some familiar faces. So to everyone who participated in that one, thank you so much. And now to some key findings. Our early draft of the roadmap identified needs for a couple of different main categories of initiatives for the state. The first being education and public awareness. We think there's a real need to increase public understanding of carbon management by developing educational resources and engaging communities. Recommendations include initiatives for transparency, public outreach, and knowledge sharing platforms that make information accessible to diverse stakeholders. Another big category of findings is on regulatory and policy frameworks to establish comprehensive regulations and standards to ensure the safe and effective deployment of carbon management technologies. This includes frameworks for long-term liability, risk assessments for projects, as well as developing consistent high-quality standards to guide projects, protect communities, and drive accountability across initiatives. Third key bucket is financial incentives and funding mechanisms. Many carbon management projects are not economically viable yet, and public capital can help attract private capital and bring costs down, similar to how public funding brought down the cost of solar and wind. The state can create financial supports, such as grants, tax credits, and equity programs to make important projects economically viable and enable strong investment from the private sector. The state can also support market building mechanisms, such as exploring carbon procurement, harmonizing strategies across state lines. Next up, we saw a need for infrastructure and capacity building. Recommendations include strengthening infrastructure for supporting carbon capture, transportation, storage, and utilization, as well as building local capacity for emergency response and efficient resource use. These address the physical and logistical foundation needed for scalable carbon management. We also identified a need for more research and feasibility studies. The state would benefit from additional research and studies to support informed decision-making on the technical, environmental, and economic aspects of carbon management. These research efforts would explore storage potential, renewable energy sources for projects, and soil health, enabling tailored solutions for our strategy, for Colorado's own strategy. Next, we also looked at a need for workforce development and transition support, aiming to address the projected workforce gap for carbon management. Recommendations include job training and retention strategies, as well as equity-focused job initiatives in communities impacted by the energy transition. Perhaps most importantly, community engagement and environmental justice. This final category emphasizes the importance of including communities, especially underserved and tribal groups, in carbon management planning and benefits. It involves the creation of an advisory board for communities with carbon management projects, making key data publicly available so communities can see what projects are being built, and providing an avenue for communities to weigh in on community benefit plans. Of these, we have found a few priority recommendations that I will walk through. One is to establish a regulatory framework for Colorado to assume long-term liability and stewardship following the closure of Class 6 injection wells. What does this mean? So when a Class 6 well, a geologic carbon storage well, closes, we believe that it is important for the state to have the framework for the state to assume long-term liability over that well. In large part because most of the companies that are coming on now, we see some companies that are established and have been here for a while, and we also see a lot of new companies. And if you ask me who I think will definitely be here in 200 years, if it's a company that started 5 years ago, or if it's the state of Colorado, I will, of course, tell you I think the state of Colorado will definitely be here in 200 years, but the company might not be. And so this one's really interesting. A lot of industry folks and community members brought this up to basically say, is there a way to make sure that that the state has the resources it needs to take care of these long-term and remediate any issues? The answer is really this regulatory framework. This would have operators, developers in Colorado who want to build these projects financially bond into this program, pay upfront, so that the state has the financial resources to assume long-term liability. A really important component of this is that all of those developers would have to guarantee and demonstrate that the well is in good standing before it is passed to the state. And if there are any issues found in that process, the developer would be responsible for figuring out, for fixing it. So that's one recommendation that we think is really important for creating a really robust and helpful regulatory framework for Colorado. The second is developing carbon management zones. So when we spoke to carbon management professionals across the state, across the country, really, and we asked them, what are the challenges? What does it mean to responsibly scale up carbon management? We heard a lot of the same things. How do we access feedstocks? How do we access clean, additional local renewable energy? How do we know what the community wants for where we're operating? And so we realized that we have a lot of this information. And so carbon management zones will look to bring together the data we have about where's there good geology? Where is the state going to do wildfire mitigation? So we have biomass. Where is there wasted energy that could be tied to a carbon removal project? And put all this together to help guide project decision-making. Within that, we would like to create a community advisory board that would allow for communities to not only access education and information about all different types of carbon management, including the ones that maybe their community is a good fit for, but it's a great way for the community to engage in community benefit plans. Right now, to access federal funding, which pretty much every carbon management project is doing, in order to access that funding, and access the tax credits that we also think will still be around for a little while, those projects have to demonstrate that they have to create community benefit plans. What does it mean for them to meaningfully support the community where they operate? And so this would be a way for communities to make sure that they're actually weighing in on that, and there's a relationship there. Next, we would like to establish a fund that provides forgivable loans for carbon storage and geothermal strat well development. Financially, knowing exactly where to drill the well is and a big financial challenge. And so just because that's the highest level of risk, that can deter a lot of private capital. And so we think this could be a very high leverage use of public capital because we will probably recoup all of that money. But also it's a great way to meaningfully de-risk the project so that we can attract the type of private capital to actually move these projects forward. I hinted at this in the carbon management zones, but we'd like to study opportunities for curtailed renewables, thermal energy storage, and waste heat as potential energy sources for CO2 removal. Powering carbon dioxide removal with fossil fuels is a waste. That's really not what we're here for. And so we not only want to make sure that that CDR is powered by clean energy, but also what about wasted energy? What about sources of energy that currently aren't being utilized? I think there's a lot of really strategic, valuable ways we can slot this into the systems that we've already got. We also will be evaluating and establishing a suite of tax credits to support carbon removal. This will provide us the time and resources to figure out what actually would ultimately net out to be revenue positive for the state. What would attract the type of actions we want to see from the private sector? What would move the needle forward most? And then move forward with those recommendations. We also want to support the deployment of low carbon concrete and brick. Building materials are a really important piece of this puzzle, and they create a lot of emissions. And so we want to highlight low carbon concrete and brick as priorities for the state. And then set clear MRV standards. MRV stands for measurement, reporting, and verification. We want to know that projects that are being built are doing what they say they're doing, are good actors in this space. And so we believe it would be very helpful for the state to set clear measurement, reporting, and verification standards for all different types of carbon removal to ensure high quality carbon removal. Inclusive of that is making sure that these projects actually are net CO2 removers. So those are some of our priority recommendations. I will turn it over to public comment in just a second, but quick, what's coming down in the next short period of time today, public comment session. We'll post the full draft the week of December 2nd with a public comment form open for 1 month. But after today, you'll be able to add public comment to our website, just even based on this presentation. If ideas are churning now and you want to start adding things into our public comment database so that we can make sure that we're notating those as well. And the final version of this roadmap will be released Q1 of 2025. Thank you so much. That was a ton of information, but really appreciate you sticking with us. I'm going to stop sharing so we can turn this over to public comment.